The ships appeared over Earth on a Tuesday morning, massive and gleaming in the sunlight. They hung in the sky above major cities like silver monuments to technology humanity could barely understand. The world held its breath for 3 days before the aliens made contact. Commander Jack Morrison stood in the briefing room at the newly formed Earth Defense Initiative headquarters, watching the first transmission play for the 100th time. The alien who called himself Ambassador Kelthron spoke perfect English, his translated voice warm and friendly. He explained that his people, the Viridian Collective, had been watching humanity for some time. They came in peace, he said, to welcome Earth into the galactic community. But there was something in the tone that bothered Jack. It reminded him of how his father used to speak to him when he was 6 years old. Patient and kind, but ultimately dismissive. Kelthron spoke as if he was explaining the rules of the universe to children who could not possibly understand without help. Kate Sullivan sat across from Jack, her fingers drumming on the table. She had been an intelligence officer for 12 years and had interviewed enough people to recognize condescension when she heard it. The Viridians offered technology, protection, and guidance. They promised to lift humanity up and keep them safe from the dangers lurking in the galaxy. They never once asked what humanity wanted. Within a week, world leaders had accepted the Viridian offer. The aliens established an embassy in Geneva and began holding daily meetings with government officials. They shared medical technology that could cure diseases. They provided clean energy solutions that could end the climate crisis. They showed humanity the stars and promised to help them reach those distant lights. The price seemed small at first. The Viridians requested that humanity limit space exploration beyond the moon. They suggested that certain areas of scientific research should be reviewed by Viridian advisors before proceeding. They offered to screen all new technological developments to ensure they were safe. It all sounded reasonable, protective even. Jack watched as the restrictions grew. He attended meetings where Viridian representatives spoke over human scientists, correcting them gently like teachers with struggling students. He saw how the aliens positioned their ships not just above cities but above military bases, power plants, and communication hubs. He noticed how every Viridian smile carried an edge of superiority. Ben Howard noticed it too. The young scientist had been assigned to study the technology the Viridians shared. He spent long hours in the lab, taking apart the devices the aliens provided. What he found troubled him deeply. The technology was deliberately limited, simplified versions of what the Viridians actually used. It was like giving a child a toy version of a real tool, something that looked impressive but lacked true capability. Kate brought her concerns to Jack one evening after a particularly frustrating diplomatic session. The Viridians had just announced new protocols for international communications, claiming they would help prevent misunderstandings. In reality, Kate had discovered, they were monitoring every transmission, every phone call, every email sent anywhere on Earth. The aliens were watching everything. Jack made a decision that night. If the Viridians were going to treat humanity like children, then humanity would act like the best kind of children. They would watch, learn, and prepare. He initiated a program so secret that even most government officials would never know it existed. He called it Operation Silent Watch. He recruited carefully. Lisa Chen was his first choice, a former intelligence operative who could blend into any situation. She had a gift for languages and an even better gift for reading people. Jack needed someone who could get close to the Viridians, learn their language beyond the basic translations, and understand how they really thought about humanity. Paul Martinez came next, an engineer who had worked on experimental aircraft before the Viridians arrived. Paul had a talent for understanding how things worked, not just from studying them but from intuiting the principles behind their design. If anyone could figure out Viridian technology, it was Paul. Nicole Grant joined the team from military intelligence. She was a tactical analyst who could look at a deployment and understand the strategy behind it. Jack needed her to watch where the Viridians positioned their forces and figure out what they were really protecting or controlling. The team started small, operating out of a basement facility that officially did not exist. They gathered information slowly and carefully, making sure the Viridians never suspected they were being studied. Lisa enrolled in the cultural exchange program the aliens had established. supposedly to help humans understand Viridian society. She learned their language quickly, but more importantly, she learned to understand the things they said when they thought no human was paying attention. The Viridians called humans the younger siblings. They spoke about humanity the way parents might discuss a toddler taking its first steps. Proud but certain that the child would fall without support. They never questioned whether humans might be more capable than they appeared. That arrogance would become their weakness. Ben and Paul worked together in the lab, examining every piece of Viridian technology they could access. They found patterns, principles that made sense once you looked past the deliberately confusing exterior. The aliens used advanced materials, but the physics behind their devices was not magical or impossible. It was science, sophisticated but understandable. More importantly, they found weaknesses. Design choices made by engineers who never expected their technology to be challenged. Nicole spent her days mapping Viridian positions across Earth. She tracked their ships, their communication posts, their supply lines. What she discovered confirmed Jack's worst suspicions. The Viridian fleet was not positioned for protection. They were positioned for control. Every major city, every military installation, every piece of critical infrastructure was under Viridian observation. If the aliens wanted to shut down Earth's defenses, they could do it in less than an hour. 6 months after the Viridians arrived, Ambassador Kelthron gave a speech at the United Nations. He spoke about threats in the galaxy, dangerous species that would harm humanity if given the chance. He showed images of aliens called the Krathaks, fierce warriors who supposedly raided peaceful worlds. The Viridians, Kelthron explained, would protect Earth from such threats. All humanity had to do was trust their guardians and accept a few more reasonable restrictions. Jack watched the speech with his team gathered around him. They had learned so much in 6 months, but they needed more time. The Viridians were tightening their control, and humanity was accepting it gladly. 18 months had passed since the Viridians arrived, and most of humanity had grown comfortable under their protection. Cities gleamed with alien technology. Diseases that had plagued mankind for centuries were gone. The news broadcasts showed smiling families benefiting from Viridian generosity. Nobody seemed to notice the cage being built around them. Jack Morrison's team had grown to 30 members, all operating in complete secrecy. They worked in hidden facilities scattered across the globe, connected by communication systems that even the Viridians could not detect. At least, Jack hoped the aliens could not detect them. Every day was a risk. Every transmission, a potential exposure. Lisa Chen had become something remarkable during her time in the Viridian Cultural Program. She had learned their language so thoroughly that she understood not just the words but the subtle meanings beneath them. The Viridians had 3 different words for protection, and Lisa had figured out that only one of them actually meant keeping someone safe. The other 2 meant control. She sat in on Viridian meetings now, trusted by the aliens as a model human student. They spoke freely around her, never imagining that she understood far more than she let on. One afternoon, she heard 2 Viridian officers discussing Earth's mineral resources and how they would be allocated once humanity accepted permanent collective membership. They spoke about humans the way miners might discuss a productive dig site, valuable, but ultimately just a resource to be managed. Lisa recorded everything on devices so small the Viridians never noticed them. Back at the facility, Kate Sullivan analyzed the recordings late into the night. What she discovered made her blood run cold. The Viridian Collective had done this 17 times before. 17 other species, all of them kept in permanent states of dependency. All of them convinced they were being protected when they were actually being controlled. Ben Howard and Paul Martinez had made breakthroughs that neither had thought possible. Working together in a secret underground lab, they had successfully reverse-engineered a Viridian shield generator. It had taken them 11 months of failures, but now they had one that worked. Better yet, they had improved it. The Viridian shields operated on a frequency that human sensors could detect and potentially disrupt. Paul could hardly believe how simple it was once they understood the principles. The Viridians had developed their technology centuries ago and never updated it because no one had ever challenged them. They were like a fortress with walls so old that everyone forgot to check for cracks. Humanity had found those cracks. Nicole Grant spent her days studying Viridian fleet movements with an intensity that worried even Jack. She had mapped every ship, every patrol pattern, every communication relay. What she found was both terrifying and encouraging. The Viridian forces were positioned perfectly to control Earth, but they were spread thin. They relied entirely on their technological advantage and the assumption that humanity would never resist. The Viridians had made the same mistake that overconfident generals had made throughout history. They had prepared to dominate but not to defend. Their ships were strong but their formations were predictable. Their weapons were powerful but their tactics were rigid. They had grown soft through centuries of easy victories over grateful client species. Jack called a meeting of his core team in a facility hidden beneath an abandoned factory in Nevada. The room was small and cold, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that flickered occasionally. It was not glamorous, but it was secure. He stood before a holographic display showing everything they had learned. The evidence was overwhelming. The Viridians were not protectors. They were conquerors who used kindness instead of weapons. They kept species dependent, harvesting resources and strategic positions across the galaxy. Earth was just their latest acquisition, a planet rich in rare minerals and perfectly positioned to control the local sector. Kate presented her findings about the Krathax, the supposed threat that justified Viridian protection. She had hacked into Viridian encrypted files using backdoors that Paul had discovered in their systems. The truth about the Krathax was startling. They had not been hostile for over 40 years. The Viridians maintained the fiction of external threats to keep their client species afraid and compliant. Lisa added her own discoveries. The Viridians had a rigid social structure based on species advancement. They ranked civilizations by technological sophistication, and lower-ranked species were expected to defer to higher-ranked ones in all matters. Humanity was ranked near the bottom, just above species that had not yet developed spaceflight. In Viridian eyes, humans were smart enough to be useful, but too primitive to be trusted with real power. Ben and Paul demonstrated the shield generator they had built. It hummed to life, creating a barrier that their instruments confirmed would stop Viridian weapons. More importantly, they had developed a weapon that could penetrate Viridian shields by exploiting the frequency weaknesses Nicole had helped them identify. The prototype was crude, but it worked. Jack listened to his team and felt a mixture of pride and fear. They had accomplished something extraordinary. They had studied the Viridians while pretending to be obedient students. They had learned the aliens' language, stolen their secrets, and developed the means to resist. But what came next would be the hardest part. He made the decision to bring 2 more people into the program. General Amy Rodriguez commanded Earth's defensive forces, such as they were. The Viridians had insisted that human military capabilities be scaled back, claiming that the collective would provide all necessary protection. Amy had complied publicly while seething privately. She had been a soldier for 30 years and knew occupation when she saw it. Secretary Greg Patterson oversaw international relations and had grown increasingly uncomfortable with Viridian oversight of human affairs. He attended diplomatic meetings where human leaders asked permission for basic decisions about their own planet. He watched as the Viridians gently but firmly guided every choice, every policy. He had started to wonder when permission would turn into orders. Jack showed them everything. The evidence of Viridian intentions, the technology his team had developed, the weaknesses they had found. He waited, while Amy and Greg absorbed what they were seeing. The silence stretched for long minutes. Amy spoke first. She had suspected something was wrong but had not imagined the scale of the deception. The Viridians had positioned themselves to control every aspect of Earth's defenses. If humanity ever tried to resist, the aliens could shut down military communications, disable weapons systems, and blind sensors before a single shot was fired. Unless humanity had systems the Viridians did not know about. Greg understood the political implications immediately. Most world leaders genuinely believed the Viridians were benevolent. They had accepted smaller and smaller freedoms in exchange for greater and greater gifts. If Jack's team was right, then humanity was already in a cage. The door had not locked yet, but it was closing. They authorized expansion of Operation Silent Watch into something bigger. Project Independence would build the weapons. the ships, and the defenses humanity needed to stand on its own. They would do it in secret, using the blind spots Nicole had identified and the technology Ben and Paul had developed. It would take time, money, and the cooperation of people across the globe who understood what was at stake. A young communications officer named Danny Wright discovered Project Independence by accident 3 months later. He had been tracking signal anomalies as part of his regular duties when he found communications that should not exist. Encrypted transmissions using technology he did not recognize, bouncing between locations that were not on any official network. Danny could have reported it through proper channels. The Viridians had made clear that any suspicious activity should be shared immediately, but something made him hesitate. He spent 2 weeks following the signals, tracing them back to their source. What he found led him to Jack Morrison. Jack had been expecting this moment. No secret lasted forever, and Danny Wright was good at his job. When the young officer appeared at an unmarked building in Colorado, asking to speak with whoever was running the underground network, Jack decided to trust him. Danny explained what he had found. He also explained why he had come to Jack instead of the Viridians. He had been monitoring alien communications for months, part of his official duties. He had noticed something disturbing. Any human transmission that mentioned independence, self-sufficiency, or questioning Viridian authority was quietly suppressed. The messages never reached their destinations. The Viridians were not just watching humanity, they were controlling what humans could say to each other. Kate Sullivan sat alone in the data center at 3 a.m, her eyes burning from staring at screens for too many hours. She had been working on cracking a particularly difficult section of Viridian encrypted files for 6 weeks. The breakthrough came when she stopped trying to force her way through the encryption and instead found a backdoor in the system that Paul had identified months earlier. The files that opened before her were marked with Viridian symbols that Lisa had taught her to read. Historical records, stored deep in the collective's archives. Kate started reading and felt her stomach turn with each new document. The Krathax had been peaceful for decades. The war the Viridians described in their speeches had ended 43 years ago with a treaty. The Krathax now traded with the collective, their ships passing through Viridian space regularly without incident. The threat that justified Viridian protection of humanity did not exist. It was a lie, maintained to keep client species afraid and dependent. But that was not the worst of it. Kate found records of other species that had tried to break free from Viridian control. There had been 3 attempts in the past 2 centuries. All 3 had been crushed with overwhelming force. The Viridians documented the destructions carefully, using them as case studies to train their officers on how to handle rebellious client species. One species, called the Telmara, had developed independence movements after 70 years of collective protection. When they demanded the right to govern themselves, the Viridians had given them a choice: return to compliance or face consequences. The Telmara chose freedom. The Viridians destroyed their colonies, disabled their ships, and left them stranded on their homeworld with technology so damaged it would take centuries to recover. The message was clear: independence from the collective was not an option. Kate printed the files and brought them to Jack at dawn. He read through them in silence, his face growing harder with each page. They had known the Viridians were controlling humanity, but they had not realized how ruthless the aliens could be when challenged. Project Independence was no longer just about freedom. It was about survival. Jack called an emergency meeting with General Amy Rodriguez and Secretary Greg Patterson. They met in a secure room where even Viridian sensors could not reach, deep underground in a facility built for a different kind of threat. He showed them Kate's discoveries and watched their faces change as they understood what they were facing. Amy spoke first. If the Viridians learned about Project Independence before humanity was ready, Earth could face the same fate as the Telmara. They needed to accelerate their timeline, but they also needed to be absolutely certain they could succeed. A failed rebellion would be worse than no rebellion at all. Greg understood the political dimension. They could not tell world leaders about the threat until they had the means to resist it. Too many officials believed in Viridian benevolence. Some would refuse to believe the evidence. Others might panic and try to negotiate, revealing the existence of Project Independence in the process. They had to maintain secrecy while building the capability to defend Earth. Jack proposed a bold plan. They needed allies, not just on Earth but among the other species under Viridian control. If humanity acted alone, the collective could isolate them and crush them. But if multiple species rose together, the Viridians would be forced to divide their forces. Danny Wright was given the task of reaching out through hidden communication channels to other client species. It took Danny 3 months to make first contact. He used the blind spots in Viridian surveillance that Nicole had mapped, sending carefully worded messages that would mean nothing to alien monitors but everything to species looking for hope. The responses came slowly, cautiously. Other civilizations had noticed humanity's quiet preparations. Some were inspired. All were terrified. A species called the Orathi sent the most detailed response. They had been under Viridian control for 112 years. They had tried subtle resistance twice and been punished both times. They admired human courage but warned that the collective was more powerful than humanity could imagine. They had ships that could destroy planets, weapons that could sterilize worlds. Fighting back was brave, but it was also suicide. Danny shared the messages with Jack, who read them carefully. The fear was understandable, but it also told him something important. No species had ever truly tried to fight back with preparation and planning. They had all been caught unprepared, their resistance movements discovered before they were ready. Humanity would not make that mistake. Ben Howard and Paul Martinez had expanded their work beyond shields and weapons. They were now building ships, not the large military vessels that the Viridians would notice, but smaller craft, designed for speed and stealth. They used human innovations combined with Viridian principles, creating hybrids that performed better than either technology alone. The first prototype launched from a hidden facility in Australia. It flew using power systems that the Viridians could not detect because they operated on principles the aliens had never encountered. Humans had spent centuries developing internal combustion engines, jet propulsion, and rocket technology. The Viridians had skipped those stages entirely, jumping straight to their current systems. They had never bothered to shield against primitive technologies because they assumed no one would use them. Paul laughed when the prototype successfully evaded Viridian sensors during its test flight. They had been so focused on building advanced systems that they forgot the value of simple ones. The ship was not as fast as Viridian vessels, but it was invisible to their detection grids. Humanity could move forces without the aliens knowing. Lisa Chen made her own discovery during this time. She had become close with several Viridian cultural officers, playing the role of the eager human student so well that they trusted her completely. One evening, over drinks that the aliens thought she found intoxicating but which actually had little effect on her, a Viridian named Tolmar spoke freely. He told her about the collective's long-term plans for Earth. Humanity would be gradually integrated into Viridian society over the next 2 centuries. Human culture would be preserved in museums, but human language, government, and independence would slowly fade. In 5 generations, humans would think of themselves as junior members of the collective, grateful for the civilization that had saved them from their own primitive nature. Lisa smiled and nodded, and asked thoughtful questions. Inside, she was recording every word. When she brought the recording to Jack, it confirmed what they all suspected. The Viridians were not offering partnership. They were offering assimilation. Humanity would cease to exist as an independent species, becoming instead a useful appendage of the collective. Nicole Grant identified the opportunity they needed. The Viridians were planning a massive fleet demonstration above Earth. They wanted to show humanity the full might of the collective, to remind everyone why Viridian protection was necessary. Every major ship would be present. Ambassador Kelthran and the collective council members assigned to Earth would all be in attendance. It would be the largest gathering of Viridian forces since they first arrived. It would also be the perfect moment to reveal Project Independence. The aliens would be concentrated, confident, and completely unprepared for resistance. If humanity could disable Viridian control systems and demonstrate their own defensive capabilities during the demonstration, they could force negotiations from a position of strength rather than weakness. The plan was dangerous. If anything went wrong, the Viridians could respond with overwhelming force before humanity had time to deploy full defenses. But continuing as they were was also dangerous. The longer they waited, the tighter Viridian control would become, and the harder it would be to break free. Jack brought the proposal to his core team. They had all worked for over 2 years in secret, sacrificing time with families and risking their lives daily. They had built weapons and ships and defenses that could give humanity a chance. Now he was asking them to risk everything on one moment, one demonstration of defiance. Ben spoke first. They had learned everything they could from watching the Viridians. They had reverse-engineered alien technology and improved it. They had found weaknesses in systems the aliens thought were invincible. If they waited longer, they might be discovered. If they acted now, they had the element of surprise. Paul agreed. The ships were ready. The weapons worked. The shields could protect major population centers. They would never be more prepared than they were right now. Every day they waited was another day for the Viridians to discover their work. Kate had concerns about casualties. If the Viridians responded with force, people would die. But she also knew that if humanity remained under collective control, they would lose something more important than individual lives. They would lose the right to determine their own future. Lisa pointed out that they had potential allies waiting. Other species were watching humanity with hope. If Earth succeeded in gaining independence, it could inspire resistance throughout the collective. If Earth failed while trying, it would crush that hope for generations. Nicole presented the tactical analysis. The Viridian fleet would be positioned for demonstration, not for combat. Their formation was designed to look impressive, not to defend against attack. Project Independence could disable their control systems before they could respond. The key was perfect timing and coordination. Project Independence had grown beyond anything Jack Morrison had imagined when he started Operation Silent Watch. What began as 30 people working in secret had expanded to 5,000 personnel across 40 nations. They operated in hidden facilities, underground bunkers, and remote locations that Viridian sensors never bothered to monitor because they seemed too primitive or isolated to matter. The quantum communication system that Danny Wright had helped develop was their greatest advantage. It used principles based on old human physics theories that the Viridians had abandoned millennia ago in favor of more efficient methods. To Viridian sensors, the quantum communications looked like random noise or natural interference. They never suspected that humanity was coordinating a global resistance right under their observation posts. Ben Howard stood in the main manufacturing facility hidden beneath the Nevada desert, watching the final shield generator roll off the production line. They had built 300 of them, enough to protect every major city and military installation on Earth. Each one was an improvement over Viridian technology, able to withstand more power and adjust frequencies faster than the alien systems. Paul Martinez was in a different facility in South Korea, overseeing the completion of the last batch of weapons. They had manufactured devices that could penetrate Viridian shields by exploiting the frequency weaknesses that Nicole had identified. The weapons were not elegant or sophisticated. They were human-built, practical, and most importantly, they worked. Field tests had proven they could disable Viridian defensive systems in seconds. The fleet was the achievement that filled Paul with the most pride. Humanity had built 47 ships in complete secrecy, using materials and construction methods that left no trace for Viridian monitors to detect. The ships were smaller than Viridian cruisers but faster and more maneuverable. They used hybrid technology that combined human innovation with alien principles, creating something neither species had built before. Nicole Grant spent her final days before the demonstration reviewing tactical plans with military commanders from around the world. They gathered in secure facilities, their meetings disguised as routine defense exercises that required no Viridian approval. Nicole showed them exactly where each Viridian ship would be positioned during the fleet demonstration, where their blind spots were, and how human forces could exploit them. The key to the plan was not destruction, but disruption. Project Independence would jam Viridian communications, disable their control systems, and demonstrate human defensive capabilities. They would prove that Earth could defend itself without collective protection. The goal was not to start a war, but to force the Viridians to accept humanity as equals. Lisa Chen had her own role to play. She had become so trusted by the Viridians that they invited her to attend the fleet demonstration aboard Ambassador Kelthron's flagship. She would be there when humanity revealed its true capabilities. watching the aliens react in real time. It was the most dangerous position anyone in Project Independence would hold, but Lisa had volunteered without hesitation. Kate Sullivan coordinated the information warfare component. When Project Independence activated, she would broadcast the truth about the Viridian Collective to every species in the galaxy. The recordings Lisa had gathered, the historical documents Kate had uncovered, the evidence of manipulation and control. It would all be transmitted simultaneously in hundreds of languages, impossible for the Viridians to suppress. The messages would go not just to governments but to ordinary citizens of client species across the collective. People had the right to know they were being controlled, not protected. Kate had worked with translators from the few species willing to help, ensuring the broadcasts would be understood by everyone who received them. Danny Wright had made contact with resistance groups on 17 different worlds. They were small, frightened, and disorganized, but they existed. When humanity made its move, Danny would signal them simultaneously. Even if they could not rise up immediately, they would know they were not alone. The Viridians could not crush 17 rebellions at once, while also dealing with Earth. General Amy Rodriguez had quietly mobilized forces across the globe. They appeared to be conducting routine exercises and maintenance operations. Nothing that would alert Viridian observers. But every soldier knew the truth. Every pilot understood what they were preparing for. On the day of the demonstration, they would be ready to defend Earth against any response the Viridians might attempt. Secretary Greg Patterson had the hardest job. He had to prepare world leaders for the shock of what was about to happen, without revealing so much that someone might panic and expose the plan. He met with presidents, prime ministers, and generals in private conversations, asking them to trust that humanity was ready to stand on its own. Some believed him immediately. Others needed convincing. A few refused to accept it and had to be kept isolated until after the demonstration began. The Viridians noticed nothing. They were too confident in their control, too certain that humanity remained grateful and obedient. Ambassador Kelthrin gave speeches about the upcoming demonstration, describing it as a celebration of the partnership between Earth and the collective. He spoke about how far humanity had come under Viridian guidance. Jack attended one of those speeches, standing in the back of the auditorium while Kelthrin addressed the United Nations. The alien's voice was warm and paternal. He praised human progress. He thanked world leaders for their cooperation. He promised that the collective would continue to guide humanity toward a brighter future. Jack listened and felt no anger, only determination. The Viridians truly believed they were helping. They thought of themselves as benevolent teachers, lifting up primitive species. They could not imagine that their students might have learned lessons the teachers never intended to teach. They had shown humanity their technology, their tactics, and their weaknesses. Now humanity would use all of that knowledge. The night before the demonstration, Jack gathered his core team one final time. They met in the same cold basement where they had first planned Project Independence, years ago when it was just a desperate hope rather than a functioning reality. Looking at their faces, Jack saw exhaustion, determination, and something else. Pride. They had accomplished something that 17 other species had failed to achieve. Ben spoke about the technology they had built. Every shield generator had been tested. Every weapon had been calibrated. The ships had completed hundreds of hours of flight testing. Nothing was perfect, but everything was ready. They had done their part. Now they would see if it was enough. Paul added that the Viridian response would depend entirely on how quickly they could adapt. The aliens had not fought a real battle in centuries. Their tactics were old. Their strategies unchanged. Humanity had studied historical battles, learned from every conflict in their own history. That experience might matter more than technology. Kate reminded them about the information warfare component. Once the broadcast started, the Viridians could not stop them. The truth would spread across the galaxy faster than collective ships could chase it. Even if humanity lost the immediate confrontation, they would have planted seeds of resistance everywhere. Lisa called in from her secure communication device. She was already aboard the Viridian flagship, preparing for the demonstration. She described the mood among the aliens. They were relaxed, almost jovial. This was meant to be a celebration, a show of strength that would reinforce humanity's dependence. They had no idea what was coming. Nicole reviewed the tactical situation one more time. She had contingency plans for every possible Viridian response. If the aliens tried to disable human infrastructure, Project Independence forces would target their control nodes. If they attempted to flee, human ships would pursue and demand negotiations. If they chose to fight, well, humanity was ready for that too. Danny confirmed that all communication systems were functioning perfectly. He could coordinate the entire planet with a single command. Resistance groups on other worlds were standing by, waiting for the signal. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity had grown up. Amy reported that military forces were in position. Soldiers who had trained for years under Viridian observation, always careful to seem less capable than they actually were. Pilots who had flown simple exercises while secretly practicing complex combat maneuvers. Engineers who had maintained aging equipment while building advanced weapons in secret. They were all ready. Greg had his own report. World leaders who understood what was happening were prepared to stand firm. They would declare Earth's independence from Viridian oversight and demand recognition as equals. They would offer peace and cooperation, but not obedience. The message would be clear. Humanity was grateful for Viridian assistance, but the time for guardianship had ended. Jack looked at his team and felt a weight settle over him. Tomorrow would change everything. If they succeeded, humanity would take its place in the galaxy as an independent species. If they failed, Earth might face the same fate as the Telmara, crushed as a warning to others. There was no middle ground. He thought about all the species living under Viridian control, convinced that the collective protected them. He thought about the future humanity would have if they continued down the current path. Slowly, the morning of the demonstration arrived, with clear skies across most of Earth. Millions of people gathered in cities to watch the Viridian fleet show its power. News channels broadcast the event globally. Children waved flags with both human and Viridian symbols. It was meant to be a celebration of partnership and protection. Jack Morrison stood in the command center buried deep beneath Colorado, watching multiple screens showing Viridian positions. The alien fleet had assembled exactly as Nicole predicted, 63 warships arranged in a formation designed to look impressive. Ambassador Kelthran's flagship at the center, surrounded by cruisers and support vessels. Every major collective representative was present. Lisa Chen sat aboard that flagship, maintaining her role as the enthusiastic human student one final time. She wore a dress provided by the Viridians for the occasion, but hidden in her jewelry were recording devices and a communication link to Jack's command center. She watched Viridian officers prepare for the demonstration. Laughing and confident, they had no idea this celebration was about to become something very different. At exactly 1000 hours local time, the Viridian demonstration began. Ships moved in synchronized patterns, their shields glowing with beautiful colors. Weapons fired harmless light shows across the sky. Kelthran's voice broadcast across every channel, speaking about the strength of the collective and the safety it provided to all member species. Jack waited until the fleet was fully committed to the demonstration. All ships focused on the display. Then he gave the order that 2 years of preparation had built toward. Danny Wright transmitted the activation code, and Project Independence came to life. Across Earth, 300 shield generators powered up simultaneously. Barriers appeared over major cities, military installations, and critical infrastructure. The shields looked different from Viridian technology, shimmering with a blue-white light that was distinctly human in character. People on the ground looked up in confusion. Those were not Viridian shields. In the same instant, human jamming systems activated. Viridian communications went silent. Their control links to Earth-based systems failed. Sensor networks that monitored the planet suddenly could not see anything. The aliens had relied on technological superiority for so long that they had never secured their systems against determined interference. 47 human ships emerged from hidden positions. They had been waiting in the blind spots that Nicole had mapped, using stealth technology that Viridian sensors could not detect. Now, they appeared around the alien fleet, not threatening but present. A clear message. You are not alone in Earth's sky. Aboard the flagship, Lisa watched chaos erupt. Viridian officers shouted at each other, trying to understand what was happening. Their systems were failing. Their communications were jammed. Unknown ships had appeared from nowhere. Kelthron stood frozen at the center of the command deck, his confident expression replaced by shock. Kate Sullivan activated the second phase. Broadcasts began transmitting on every frequency. In every language spoken across the collective, the truth about Viridian control, the evidence of manipulation, the historical records of crushed rebellions, it all poured out in a flood of information that could not be stopped or suppressed. The broadcasts reached not just government channels but personal devices, entertainment systems, and public networks on 17 different worlds. Citizens of client species listened in growing disbelief as they learned their protectors were actually their controllers. Resistance groups that Danny had contacted received confirmation that they were not alone. Jack opened a communication channel directly to the Viridian flagship, bypassing their jammed systems using the quantum communication technology Danny had developed. His voice reached Kelthron and every Viridian officer present. He spoke calmly and clearly. Humanity thanked the Viridians for their initial assistance. Earth was grateful for the technology and knowledge shared, but the time for guardianship had ended. Humanity was ready to stand on its own, to defend itself, to take responsibility for its own future. Earth was declaring independence from Viridian oversight. Kelthron found his voice, demanding to know how humanity had developed such capabilities. Jack explained simply, they had watched. They had learned. They had been treated like children, so they had acted like good students. The Viridians had taught them everything, including lessons the aliens never intended to share. The ambassador tried to reason with Jack, his tone shifting from shock to anger to something like desperation. He warned that the collective would not tolerate this rebellion. Earth would face consequences. Other species had tried to defy Viridian authority and failed. Kate's broadcasts had already covered that truth. The galaxy now knew what happened to species that sought independence. The Telmara and others had been crushed as warnings. But Jack pointed out something important. Those species had been caught unprepared. Their resistance discovered before they were ready. Humanity had prepared for 2 years in complete secrecy. Kelthron ordered his fleet to respond with force. Viridian weapons systems powered up, targeting human shields and ships. But Paul Martinez had anticipated this moment. He activated the penetration weapons that Project Independence had developed. Targeted beams struck Viridian shields at their exact frequency weaknesses. Shields across the alien fleet flickered and failed. Not all of them, but enough to prove the point. Humanity had weapons that could hurt Viridian vessels. More importantly, they had studied Viridian tactics and formations so thoroughly that they knew exactly where to strike for maximum effect. Nicole Grant directed human forces with precision. They did not attack to destroy, only to disable. Viridian communication relays went dark. Shield generators overloaded. Weapons systems shut down. Within 15 minutes, the mighty collective fleet found itself partially blind, unable to communicate effectively, and vulnerable to attack. But Jack did not press the advantage. He opened the channel again and made his offer. Humanity did not want war. They wanted recognition as equals. The collective could withdraw their control systems and negotiate a new relationship based on mutual respect, or they could continue fighting and risk losing ships above Earth while the rest of the galaxy watched. Kelthron refused immediately. The collective did not negotiate with client species. They guided, they protected, they controlled. That was the natural order of the galaxy. Advanced species helping primitive ones. Jack had expected this response. He activated the third phase. Human ships moved into attack formation, their weapons locked onto Viridian vessels. At the same time, Kate broadcasted live footage from the confrontation to every world in the collective. Citizens across the galaxy watched as humanity stood armed and ready to defend itself. More importantly, they watched human forces hold fire despite having the advantage. They saw Jack offering peace even while demonstrating strength. It was a stark contrast to Viridian promises of protection backed by the threat of overwhelming force. On other worlds, resistance movements began activating. Small groups that had hidden for decades suddenly found courage in humanity's example. They started their own demonstrations, their own demands for independence. The Viridians faced a choice: fight Earth and risk losing control of their entire client network, or negotiate. The collective council debated for 3 hours while the two fleets remained in tense standoff. Lisa listened to the arguments from her position on the flagship. Some council members wanted immediate retaliation, to crush Earth as they had crushed others. But others pointed out the changed circumstances. Humanity had prepared too well. Attacking them would be costly, and success was not guaranteed. More concerning was the spread of resistance across collective space. If the Viridians destroyed Earth, they would create martyrs that would inspire rebellions for generations. If they failed to destroy Earth, they would appear weak. Either way, their control was slipping. Finally, Kelthron returned to the communication channel. His voice had lost its warmth, the paternal tone replaced by cold formality. The Viridian Collective agreed to withdraw their direct oversight of Earth. They would negotiate new terms for the relationship between humanity and the Collective. There would be consequences for this deception, but those would be discussed through diplomatic channels. Jack accepted the terms. He ordered human forces to stand down but keep shields active. The Viridian fleet began moving away from Earth, their formation broken and their pride damaged. Kelthron cut the communication without another word. Lisa carefully made her way off the flagship during the confusion, claiming she needed to return to Earth for the negotiations. The Viridians let her go, too distracted by their failure to think about one human observer. She took with her recordings of every Viridian conversation during the crisis. Valuable intelligence for the negotiations to come. As the alien ships departed, celebrations erupted across Earth. People danced in the streets. Not because the Viridians were gone, but because humanity had proved it could stand on its own. The shields remained active overhead, a visible reminder that Earth was now defended by human technology. In the command center, Jack's team gathered to watch the departure. They were exhausted, running on adrenaline and caffeine. Ben and Paul had not slept in 40 hours. Kate looked like she might collapse at any moment. Nicole had stress-written enough contingency plans to fill a library. Danny had coordinated thousands of communications without a single error. General Amy Rodriguez arrived with Secretary Greg Patterson. They brought news from world leaders. 40 nations had formally declared their support for independence. Others were joining by the hour. There would be political complications, arguments about who had authority to speak for Earth, but the fundamental decision was made. Humanity was done being protected. Amy pointed out that they had won this battle but not the war. The Viridians would negotiate, but they would also look for ways to reassert control. Humanity needed to remain vigilant, continue developing technology, and build alliances with other species. Independence was not a destination but an ongoing effort. Greg added that other client species were already requesting communication with Earth. They wanted to know how humanity had succeeded. Some wanted help building their own resistance movements. Earth was becoming a symbol of freedom across the collective, which brought both opportunity and danger. Jack listened to their concerns and acknowledged them all. Project Independence would not end with this victory. It would transform into something larger. An ongoing effort to ensure Earth remained free and to help other species achieve the same freedom. But for this moment, he allowed himself and his team to feel satisfaction. They had been treated like children by aliens who assumed humanity would always need guidance. Instead, humans had watched, learned, and prepared. They had turned patronizing protection into opportunity for growth. Ben spoke the thought they were all feeling. The Viridians had made the classic mistake of underestimating their opponents. They had judged humanity by their technology, rather than their potential. They had forgotten that the most dangerous students are the ones who pay attention. Paul added that humanity had learned valuable lessons too. They had learned to recognize control disguised as kindness. They had learned the importance of preparation and patience. Most importantly, they had learned that freedom was worth fighting for, even against overwhelming odds. Kate observed that Earth's relationship with the galaxy had changed forever. Other species would now see humanity differently. Not as primitive children but as equals, who earned their independence through cunning and courage. Some would admire that, others would fear it. Lisa, who had just arrived from her escape from the Viridian flagship, had her own observation. The Viridians were not evil, just supremely arrogant. They truly believed they were helping by controlling others. The hardest part of the negotiations would be making them understand that good intentions did not justify taking away freedom. Nicole suggested that humanity should approach the galaxy with cautious optimism. They had proved they could defend themselves, but they should not become isolated. Earth needed allies, trade partners, and friends among the stars. Independence did not mean standing alone. Danny had the final word. Throughout the crisis, he had been in communication with resistance groups across collective space. They were inspired by Earth's example but also terrified of Viridian retaliation. Humanity had a responsibility now. Not to lead those rebellions but to show that independence was possible. Jack looked at his team and felt pride mixed with exhaustion. They had given humanity something precious. Not just freedom from Viridian control, but confidence in their own abilities. Earth had faced the most powerful force in their region of space and emerged independent. As the last Viridian ship disappeared from Earth's orbit, Jack walked to the window of the command center. Above ground, people were celebrating. Children were playing under human-made shields. Ships built by human hands patrolled the sky. It was not perfect, and challenges remained, but it was theirs. The galaxy had treated humanity like children for 2 years. Now those children had graduated. They had learned their lessons well, perhaps too well for their teachers' comfort, and as Jack watched the stars appear in the evening sky, he knew that humanity's real journey was just beginning. They were free, independent, and ready to face whatever came next. The Viridians would not forget this day, and neither would the 17 other species watching from across the collective. Earth had shown the galaxy that children grow up, students surpass teachers, and underestimating humanity was a mistake that even advanced aliens should avoid, losing their identity until they became just another grateful client. He thought about the children being born today, who deserved to grow up free. Ben noticed Jack's expression and spoke quietly. They had been students for 2 years, watching and learning. The Viridians had treated them like children, and humanity had used that advantage to prepare. Tomorrow, they would graduate. Sometimes the best students became better than their teachers. The meeting ended near midnight. Each team member left to take up their positions for the next day. Jack remained in the basement for a while, looking at the maps and plans that covered the walls. 2 years of work, thousands of people risking everything, all coming down to one moment. He thought about the first day the Viridian ships appeared, how beautiful they had seemed in the sunlight. He remembered Ambassador Kelthrin's warm voice promising protection and guidance. He recalled the moment he had realized they were building a cage, not offering help. Tomorrow, humanity would show the galaxy what happened when you treated children like they could never grow up. Tomorrow, they would prove that being underestimated was sometimes the greatest advantage. Tomorrow, the Viridians would learn that their students had been paying very close attention. Jack turned off the lights and left the facility. Above him, the stars shone brilliantly in the night sky. Soon, humanity would reach those stars on their own terms. They just had to survive the next 24 hours. Danny confirmed that communication systems were ready. They could coordinate actions across the entire planet simultaneously. Every team knew their role. Every weapon was positioned. Every ship was fueled and ready. They just needed the order to proceed. Amy and Greg joined the meeting via secure channel. They had been preparing political and military leadership for this moment, carefully selecting officials who would stand firm when the truth was revealed. The governments of 40 nations were ready to declare independence from Viridian oversight. Military forces were positioned to defend critical infrastructure. Jack looked at the faces around him, people who had become more than a team. They were the ones who had refused to accept comfortable slavery. They had chosen the harder path, the dangerous path, because they believed humanity deserved better. He gave the order. Project Independence would proceed. On the day of the Viridian fleet demonstration, humanity would stand up and declare itself ready to face the galaxy on its own terms. They would offer peace, but they would no longer beg for permission to exist. The children were growing up, and it was time their guardians understood that. Jack recruited Danny on the spot. They needed someone who understood communications at his level. The young officer had proved he could think for himself and take risks when necessary. Those were the exact qualities Project Independence required. By the time 2 years had passed since first contact, the situation had changed dramatically. The Viridians announced new restrictions on human population growth in space colonies. They required advance approval for all interplanetary missions. Ambassador Kelthran gave speeches about humanity's reckless nature and the need for mature guidance. The tone had shifted. The Viridians were no longer just patient teachers. They were becoming annoyed parents, frustrated that their children were not learning quickly enough. Jack knew what that meant. The aliens had noticed signs of human discontent. They were tightening control before resistance could grow. In hidden facilities around the world, Project Independence accelerated production. They had the technology, the weapons, and the plans. What they needed now was the courage to use them. Humanity had been watching and learning for 2 years. The time for being children was ending. The question was whether they could grow up fast enough to survive what came next, grateful for the protection and the technology. No one seemed to notice they were trading freedom for safety. Kate looked at Jack and asked the question they were all thinking. What happens when the Viridians decide humanity will never grow up? What happens when Earth becomes a permanent child, always dependent, always controlled? Jack did not have an answer yet, but he knew one thing with certainty. Humanity deserved better than to spend eternity being patted on the head and told what to do. If the Viridians wanted to treat them like children, then humanity would have to show them that children grow up, sometimes faster than anyone expects.